Federalist Number 11. The Utility of the Union in Respect to Commercial Relations and a Navy, for the Independent Journal. To the People of the State of New York. The importance of the Union in a commercial light is one of those points about which there is least room to entertain a difference of opinion, and which has, in fact, commanded the most general assent of men who have any acquaintance with the subject. This applies as well to our intercourse with foreign countries, as with each other. There are appearances to authorize a supposition that the adventurous spirit, which distinguishes a commercial character of America, has already excited uneasy sensations in several of the maritime powers of Europe. They seem to be apprehensive of our too great interference in that carrying trade, which is the support of their navigation and the foundation of their naval strength. Those of them which have colonies in America look forward to what this country is capable of becoming, with painful solicitude. They foresee the dangers that may threaten their American dominions from the neighborhood of states, which have all the dispositions and would possess all the means requisite to the creation of a powerful marine. Impressions of this kind will naturally indicate the policy of fostering divisions among us, and of depriving us, as far as possible, of an active commerce, in our own bottoms. This would answer the threefold purpose of preventing our interference in their navigation, of monopolizing the profits of our trade, and of clipping the wings by which we might soar to a dangerous greatness. Did not prudence forbid the detail, it would not be difficult to trace, by facts, the workings of this policy to the cabinets of ministers. If we continue united, we may counteract a policy so unfriendly to our prosperity in a variety of ways. By prohibitory regulations extending at the same time throughout the states, we may oblige foreign countries to bid against each other for the privileges of our markets. This assertion will not appear chimerical to those who are able to appreciate the importance of markets of 3 millions of people, increasing in rapid progression, for the most part exclusively addicted to agriculture, and likely from local circumstances to remain so, to any manufacturing nation, and the immense difference there would be to the trade and navigation of such a nation, between a direct communication in its own ships and an indirect conveyance of its products and returns to and from America and the ships of another country. Suppose, for instance, we had a government in America capable of excluding Great Britain, with whom we have at present no treaty of commerce, from all our ports. What would be the probable operation of this step upon her politics? Would it not enable us to negotiate, with the fairest prospect of success, for commercial privileges over the most value and extensive kind in the dominions of that kingdom? When these questions have been asked, upon other occasions, they have received a plausible, but not a solid or satisfactory answer. It has been said that prohibitions on our part would produce no change in the system of Britain, because she could prosecute her trade with us through the medium of the Dutch, who would be her immediate customers and paymasters for those articles which were wanted for the supply of our markets. But would not her navigation be materially injured by the loss of important advantage of being her own carrier in that trade? Would not the principal part of its profits be intercepted by the Dutch as a compensation for their agency and risk? Would not the mere circumstance of freight occasion a considerable deduction? Would not so circuitous an intercourse facilitate the competitions of other nations, by enhancing the price of British commodities in our markets, and by transferring to other hands the management of this interesting branch of British commerce? A mature consideration of the objects suggested by these questions will justify a belief that the real disadvantages to Britain from such a state of things, conspiring with prepossessions of a great part of the nation in favor of American trade, and with the importunities of the West India Islands, would produce a relaxation in her present system, and would let us into the enjoyment of privileges in the markets of those islands elsewhere, from which our trade would derive the most substantial benefits. Such a point gained from the British government, and which could not be expected without an equivalent in exemptions and immunities in our markets, would be likely to have a correspondent effect on the conduct of other nations, who would not be inclined to see themselves altogether supplanted in our trade. A further resource for influencing the conduct of European nations towards us in this respect would arise from the establishment of a federal navy. There can be no doubt that the continuance of the Union under an efficient government would put it in our power, at a period not very distant, to create a navy which, if it could not vie with those great maritime powers, would at least be respectable weight if thrown into the scale of either two contending parties. This would be more peculiarly the case in relation to the operations of West Indies. A few ships of the line, sent opportunely to the reinforcement of either side, would often be sufficient to decide the fate of a campaign, on the event which interests of the greatest magnitude were suspended. Our position is, in this respect, a most commanding one. And if to this consideration we add that the usefulness of supplies from this country in the prosecution of military operations in the West Indies, it will readily be perceived that a situation so favorable would enable us to bargain with great advantage for commercial privileges. A price would be set not only upon our friendship, but upon our neutrality. By a steady adherence to the Union we may hope, ere long, to become the arbiter of Europe and America, and to be able to incline the balance of European competitions in this part of the world, as our interest may dictate. But in the reverse of this eligible situation, we shall discover that the rivalships of the parts would make them checks upon each other, and would frustrate all the tempting advantages which nature has kindly placed within our reach. In a state so insignificant, our commerce would be a prey to the wanton intermeddlings of all nations at war with each other, who, having nothing to fear from us, would with little scruple or remorse supply their wants by depredations on our property as often as it fell in their way. The rights of neutrality will only be respected when they are defended by an adequate power. A nation, despicable by its weakness, forfeits even the privilege of being neutral. Under a vigorous national government, the natural strength and resources of the country directed to a common interest would baffle all the combinations of European jealousy to restrain our growth. This situation would even take away the motive to such combinations by inducing an impracticability of success. An active commerce, an extensive navigation, and a flourishing marine would then be the offspring of a moral and physical necessity. We might defy the little arts of the little politicians to control or vary the irresistible and unchangeable course of nature. But in a state of disunion, these combinations might exist and might operate with success. It would be in the power of the maritime nations, availing themselves of our universal impotence, to prescribe the conditions of our political existence. And as they have a common interest in being our carriers, and still more in preventing our becoming theirs, they would in all probability combine to embarrass our navigations as such a manner as would in effect destroy it, and confine us to a passive commerce. We should then be compelled to content ourselves with the first price of our commodities, and to see the profits of our trade snatched from us to enrich our enemies and persecutors. That unequaled spirit of enterprise, which signalizes the genius of the American merchants and navigators, and which in itself is an inexhaustible mine of national wealth, would be stifled and lost, and poverty and disgrace would overspread a country which, with wisdom, might make herself the admiration and envy of the world. There are rights of great movement to the trade of America, which are rights of the Union. I allude to the fisheries, to the navigation of the western lakes, and to that of the Mississippi. The dissolution of the Confederacy would give room for delicate questions concerning the future existence of these rights, which the interest of more powerful partners would hardly fail to solve to our disadvantage. The dispossession of Spain with regard to the Mississippi needs no comment. France and Britain are concerned with us in the fisheries, and view them as of the utmost moment in their navigation. They, of course, would hardly remain long indifferent to that decided mastery, of which experience has shown us to be possessed in this valuable branch of traffic, and by which we are able to undersell those nations in their own markets. What more natural than that should they be disposed to exclude from the list of such dangerous competitions? This branch of trade ought not to be considered as a partial benefit. All the navigating states may, in different degrees, advantageously participate in it, and, under circumstance of greater extension of mercantile capital, would not be unlikely to do it. As a nursery of seamen, it is now, or when time shall be more nearly assimilated the principles of navigation in the several states, will become a universal resource. To the establishment of a navy, it must be indispensable. To this great national object, a navy, union will contribute in various ways. Every institution will grow and flourish in proportion to the quantity and extent of the means concentrated towards its formation and support. A navy of the United States, as it would embrace the resources of all, is an object of far less remote than a navy of any single state or partial confederacy, which would only embrace the resources of a single part. It happens, indeed, that different proportions of the confederated America possess each some peculiar advantage to this essential establishment. The more southern states furnish in greater abundance certain kinds of naval stores, tar, pitch, and turpentine. Their wood for the construction of ships is also of a more solid and lasting texture. The difference in the duration of the ships of which the navy might be composed, if chiefly constructed of southern wood, would be of signal importance, either in the view of naval strength or of national economy. Some of the southern and of the middle states yield a greater plenty of iron, and of better quality. Seamen must chiefly be drawn from the northern hive. The necessity of naval protection to external or maritime commerce does not require a particular elucidation, no more than the conduciveness of that species of commerce to the prosperity of a navy. An unrestrained intercourse between states themselves will advance the trade of each by an interchange of their respective productions, not only for the supply of reciprocal wants at home, but for exportation to foreign markets. The veins of commerce in every part will be replenished, and will acquire additional motion and vigor from a free circulation of the commodities of every part. Commercial enterprise will have a much greater scope from the diversity in the productions of different states. When the staple of one fails from a bad harvest or unproductive crop, it can call to its aid the staple of another. The variety, not less than the value, of products from exportation contributes to the activity of foreign commerce. It can be conducted upon much better terms with a large number of materials of a given value than with a small number of materials of the same value, arising from the competitions of trade and from the fluctuations of markets. Particular articles may be in great demand at certain periods, and unsellable at others. But if there be a variety of articles, it can scarcely happen that they should all be at one time in the latter predicament. And on this account, the operations of the merchant would be less liable to any considerable obstruction or stagnation. The speculative trader will at once perceive the force of these observations and will acknowledge that the aggregate balance of the commerce of the United States would bid fair to be much more favorable than that of the 13 states without a union or with partial unions. It may perhaps be replied to this, that whether the states are united or disunited, there would still be an intimate intercourse between them which would answer the same ends. This intercourse would be fettered, interrupted, and narrowed by a multiplicity of causes, which in the course of these papers have been amply detailed. A unity of commercial, as well as political interests, can only result from a unity of government. There are other points of view in which this subject might be placed, of a striking or animating kind, but they would lead us too far into the regions of futurity, and would involve topics not proper for a newspaper discussion. I shall briefly observe that our situation invites and our interests prompt us to aim at an ascendant in the system of American affairs. The world may politically, as well as geographically, be divided into 4 parts, each having a distinct set of interests. Unhappily for the other 3, Europe, by her arms and by her negotiations, by force and by fraud, has in different degrees extended her dominion over them all. Africa, Asia, and America have successively felt her domination. The superiority she has long maintained has tempted her to plume herself as the mistress of the world, and to consider the rest of mankind as created for her benefit. Men admired as profound philosophers have, in direct terms, attributed to her inhabitants a physical superiority, and have gravely asserted that all animals, and with them the human species, degenerate in America, that even dogs cease to bark after having breathed a while in our atmosphere. Facts have too long supported these arrogant pretensions of the Europeans. It belongs to us to vindicate the honor of the human race, and to teach that assuming brother moderation. Union will enable us to do it. Disunion will add another victim to his triumphs. Let Americans disdain to be the instruments of European greatness. Let the 13 states, bound together in a strength and indissoluble union, concur in erecting one great American system, superior to the control of all transatlantic force or influence, and able to dictate the terms of the connection between the old and the new world. Publius. Analysis. Hamilton says he wants to bring attention to an issue that people are not yet addressing in the debate as to whether to ratify the new U.S. Constitution or not, which is issues of the sea, maritime trade, and a strong navy to support it. Initially, focusing on the European powers' current monopoly of the sea, and that many of those same powers hold land and colonies on the American continent, those same powers would not have much reason to hope the Americans would do well in their own step into the world of maritime economy. That the Americans would have an advantage on the sea if they made a navy and merchant marine of private enterprise, the European powers would stand to lose a lot of money and prestige if they allowed the Americans to muscle in on their monopolies of trade, freight carrying, and fishing. So, Americans in turn should protect and ferment their burgeoning merchant trade by creating a large federal union, as prescribed by the U.S. Constitution, and a large powerful navy to make sure none of those Euro powers could interfere with us and our business. Those foreign powers would have every reason to interfere in order to protect their own industries, but also to make sure the U.S. did not become too powerful and dominant. The Americans, then, to make sure the Euro powers can't or won't want to try, should form a union which would allow the states to cooperate together toward the same goals and aims. A nation capable of combining materials, industries, money, populations, and effort to make all of the above not only possible, but an asset. Forming a navy, which will give a reason to the states and federal nation to form those shipbuilding and material-gathering industries to begin with, and to protect the merchant and carrying industry that they knew would annoy the Euro powers and require a navy to protect, is essential and necessary in order to meet any of the above ends and goals. It would also bolster not only the new nation's warfighting prowess, but make it so those Euro powers wouldn't want to engage us to begin with. Hamilton acknowledges that it would be difficult to make a navy which could match the most powerful countries, but also says we don't really need one, at least initially. A navy sufficiently strong enough to join an alliance with other nations would be enough to tip the tide of any battle, and allow the Americans to ensure and guarantee neutrality to begin with. He very poignantly says, "The rights of neutrality will only be respected when they are defended by an adequate power. A nation, despicable by its weakness, forfeits even the privilege of being neutral," in order to illustrate this as a concrete reality. Hamilton supposes some potential outcomes, or logical consequences of having a navy and federal union of states, and not having one or either, and paints a gloomy picture should the new nation fail to ratify the Constitution. In contrast, he paints a bright and hopeful future should the states follow the Federalist advice, where he says, with wisdom, might make herself the admiration and envy of the world. Hamilton discusses some extra benefits the country could obtain if they followed his advice, such as a robust economy which supplies itself from different parts of the country, and will allow more goods to be created and shipped around to further increase the wealth and prosperity of each state as a result, to grow the whole damn thing bigger in tandem with the merchants and navy. Noting as well that it will allow a number of staple resources which could be replaced by borrowing from other states the lost materials or crops, should the losses be caused by bad luck or predictable misfortune. Warning that the buttress against calamity would not be so likely should the nation be broken up into anything but one solid nation. He ends the paper with a declaration to strength and an appeal to justice, noting that Europe has through various means basically dominated the entirety of the world. He notes the justifications for this are absurd and nonsensical, and that spitting in the eye of the pretentious and boastful power would be a restoration of honor to the human race and a lesson in humility to the aggressors.